Yeah, so since I have the honor of being the first speaker, I think, once again, I want to say a big thank you to all the organizers for putting on this event. I think they deserve a massive round of applause. Cool. So yeah, as you heard, my name is Mike Dalgleish, and I'm here all the way from Melbourne, Australia. Really, really long way, but I'm really happy to be here. If you've been following me at all, I'm sure you're aware that what I'm really passionate about, and have been for the past few years, is the combination of component architectures, specifically in the React community, and design systems, and how we can bring the world of design and development together. It's the combination of these two things that helped kick off my work with CSS modules, probably what I'm most well known for, and I'm sure a few of you are using in production apps today, as I am. But what I'm really interested in is what all of this means for the future of design in our industry and where we're going as a community, and how we're going to work together in the future. So I think this is a really exciting space to be looking at, if not actively working in today, and I hope you'll find some value out of my perspective on this. So I've been working in this area at a company called Seek in Australia. They're the leading job site there. And we've had a lot of active work in the design system space. For the past year and a half, I've been working full-time on our Living Style Guide, which is a React component suite and supporting toolset as well. So this has been a huge success internally for us. It's really changed the way we think about how we design and develop together. This is open source as well, so a few of you have probably already seen it, but if you haven't, please do check it out. Of course, it didn't start this way. Building up a component system or design system of this sort takes a lot of work over many years, usually. In our case, it started as a static style guide. It was the designers at the company getting together and saying, we need to define as a group what design at Seek is for ourselves, but of course for people who are building it, people who are making decisions about design and so on. It wasn't long after that design tooling started to change quite significantly. Sketch really started to take off. And one of the great things about Sketch is it's got an abstraction called symbols, which is very much like components in a component system. This is our open source Sketch library that picked up a bit of steam internally. So it's just a relatively small set of symbols that were commonly used throughout a lot of our projects. And it was just enough to get designers up to speed with the basics of designing a UI inside of our company. The problem, though, was that those were scoped to a single document. We looked into tools like Craft, which is a plugin suite for Sketch by InVision. Most notably, they have a library plugin. And what it does is it allows you to take those symbols that we saw before and more easily share them across an entire group of designers and have people contribute back and keep it up to date and have a live, living set of symbols that you can use in your day-to-day design work. So as you can see here, someone's designing a native application and they're pulling in symbols from that sidebar there. The challenge, of course, is that it took a lot of work. So there's, of course, the most obvious work of keeping this library up to date purely from a design standpoint as designers iterate and revise on our design standards. But the challenge, of course, is that we're building real live applications across many teams, and those teams themselves often are iterating on these design patterns in the code. So as the code changes, how do our designs stay up to date? It's basically a full-time job to keep track of all of these changes and to keep that central design repository up to date. It was around this time that we started investing in React. So what really drew us to React in the first place was its server-side rendering capabilities, particularly for SEO. And what we were really surprised about was how its component architecture really changed the way we think about development and design. It's had a huge impact on us internally, and I think we've seen the exact same thing play out at companies all over the world, and I'm sure it's happening for you as well. It was out of this work that CSS modules really became a thing. Our project was, I guess, technically the first CSS modules project in the world, and it's been really exciting for us to see it take off all over the place, here in Cluj. If you looked inside of that first project that we created this little modules directory of things that we wanted to share openly in the future but weren't quite ready. And that's where our Seek style guide began its life. So we started putting React components in there that we thought were usable across the whole application and theoretically usable across the whole company. That, of course, worked really well and led naturally to it being freed from that folder inside of a project into its own standalone repository on GitHub, publishing to NPM, and teams all throughout the company started picking up on this, and it's become the standard toolkit throughout our company today. The challenge here is, how do we feed back into design? Again, we still have this problem that as our component library continues to evolve, how do designers stay up to date with all these decisions that are happening on a daily basis? Pull requests are being merged literally as I'm preparing to come up on stage, right? Pull request reviews are happening as we speak. And this work needs to happen to keep everything up to date. Luckily for us, Airbnb have been pioneering in this space for quite a while, and they've been happy to share their work. As was mentioned by Alex, last year I finished up this conference talking about CSS and JS, and I touched on react-sketchapp as being a big part of what's interesting about that space. So if you're not sure what react-sketchapp is, it's basically a React renderer for Sketch, as the name might suggest. So as you can see here on the left, you've got some pretty standard looking React code, or I guess React native code in this case, and you look on the right there and you can see it's being rendered into Sketch. Pretty amazing stuff, and when I saw it, it completely blew me away. And it's been a big influencer in terms of how I think about the design system space. John Gold from Airbnb, when he released this project, he said, in Sketch we use symbols and overrides, in React we use components and properties. The concepts are so similar that it seems silly not to unify them. When you see this play out in a more traditional design process, it's pretty incredible. So this is an animation they released of what it looks like internally. So you can see there on the left, there's a panel where they're selecting the component from their design system. They're adjusting the properties of that symbol as you would do as a developer working in React. When they're finished, they create an instance of that and drag it there onto the artboard in Sketch, where what you end up with is something that is pretty fluid as a design tool, but based in the real source of truth in the code. So as that code continues to evolve, not only is the production application changing, but the next round of design is being updated as well. Pretty incredible. Unfortunately for us, it came with a few requirements, and I'm sure this would trip up most of you, I would say, in this room if you wanted to try this out. The first requirement, as you can probably guess, is that you have to use React. Now, a lot of us use React. We use React, so that's not an issue, but there's got to be at least one person in this room who that's already a problem for you. For us, that was fine. The second requirement is you had to write your styles in JavaScript. Now, again, last year I was here talking all about the virtues of CSS and JS. I'm definitely a fan of CSS and JS, but that isn't the tech choice that we've made internally, and we're not sure if we're ready to migrate. There are good reasons why we continue to use CSS modules. So that was a bit of a challenge for us. And finally, we would have to build everything with cross-platform primitives. So that means view, text, image, no divs and spans and H2s. You can't couple yourself to the web browser because Sketch is not a web browser. Another way of thinking about it is basically you have to write your code as if it's React Native code and then target the different environments. So that was a real challenge for us. I was really disappointed that we couldn't make use of it immediately, but what I really wanted to do was see if we could find some sort of temporary solution to at least get us on this path. The biggest problem we have to solve is the fact that we didn't have a single source of truth, and whatever tech choice we make in the future, the one thing that we were aiming for was that the Git repository should be the source of truth in our design system, because that is the one thing that you can tie into production applications. And as that continues to evolve, we can make sure that at least everyone's on that same page. One idea that people are often quick to write off, including myself, is how about you just check those design assets into the repository itself? And funnily enough, Sketch actually makes this possible based on its file format, which I'll go into a bit more detail later. In our case, we actually wrote some custom node scripts to be able to convert Sketch files into a format we could check in. Luckily, there's actually a nice, easy visual tool called Cactus with like the cutest logo ever. And it's basically a Git client for Sketch files. You can see the raw files that you're checking in on the left there, and you can see a diff before and after. It's a pretty great tool. It's open source. You can go check that out. Unfortunately for us, it never really worked out the way we wanted to. Because even though it made the problem clearer in the sense that now, as people were contributing to our living style guide, they were now aware that at the same time as updating, say, a button, they should update button.sketch. It didn't actually solve the problem. Because now, if anything, it became more painfully obvious that we were doing this double handling of design and development work. And not everyone had the right tools or experience to make both changes. And coordinating it was really hard and actually slowed things down to the point that people actually just kind of gave up on it. I'd say for us, it was a failed experiment. So we were a little bit disheartened at this point. The ideal of react-sketchapp we couldn't quite use. Trying to check in the assets that we were already working on, that didn't quite work. So we weren't sure what the next step for us was. The timing could not have been much better though, because if you look at this list of requirements for using react-sketchapp, they're pretty common problems that people would have with it. I'm sure, like I said, most of you in this room, if you wanted to try it out, would run into these issues. Conrad Zweinel from a company called Brainly ran into exactly these, and he said, we were unable to quickly work around these limitations, so we created HTML-sketchapp. And if you're wondering what HTML-sketchapp is, well, it's a tool that popped up in my Twitter feed randomly one day, thanks to John Gold as well. And I looked at the README for it, and this is what I saw. Basically, it's a tool that lets you take generic web content and render it into Sketch. So here you can see on the left they've got their company style guide being rendered there, Conrad's Twitter account, you've got Stack Overflow, DuckDuckGo. You know, if you think about it, these are all just random kind of generic web content with all sorts of different technology on both the back end and the front end, and yet here it is all in Sketch. So I couldn't really believe my eyes here. I thought this was really incredible. I touched on it earlier, and I'm going to go into more detail now. The reason why this is possible is because of Sketch's open file format. And this is a relatively new thing for Sketch. It didn't always have this. So a nice little secret about Sketch files is that they're actually zip files. So if you work with Sketch and you have a Sketch file on your machine, go ahead and rename it to .zip and extract it, and you'll see something like this. So you've just got some JSON files, a couple of folders there with thumbnails and so on. Everything that's in a Sketch file is basically there in plain text for you to have a look at. If you open one of those JSON files, you'll see something like this that at first glance might look a bit intimidating, but when you actually drill in, it's really just a small handful of instances of these classes with some relatively human-readable properties. It's at least simple enough that you can easily reverse engineer it, right? Open up Sketch, create a rectangle, have a look at the JSON, see what you got. And that's basically what Conrad did at Brainly. Now, if you look at HTML-sketchapp, what it gives you is a set of classes, so you can programmatically generate instances of that JSON we saw before. But the most impressive part of the tool is that last one, node to sketch layers. And it's a function included in HTML-sketchapp that lets you pass it an HTML element, from DOM element, sorry, from the browser, and convert it into an array of layers inside of Sketch. The end of that process is a couple of files, JSON files similar to what we saw before, document.asketch.json and page.asketch.json. And I know what you're thinking, what's this asketch? Because that's what I was thinking, of course. And that's short for almost sketch. Unfortunately, I won't go into detail, but there are some restrictions in terms of the Sketch file format where a couple of things basically can't be created outside of Sketch. Hopefully that will go away one day, but basically it means that these JSON files need to be imported into Sketch via a plugin, but for the most part it's all automated. There is that one manual step, but that's it. So when I saw this, again, I couldn't believe it. I wanted to take it for a spin. I charted my progress on Twitter, so some of you may have seen this already. The first thing I wanted to do to kind of get a minimum viable example of using this with the least effort was to just point it at the website. Not trying to build a component system, just point it at a page and see what I get. And so you can see, if you remember what it looked like before, it's pretty close. The only things it really struggled with was the SVG. So at the time, it didn't have SVG support. We hacked our way around that, but they actually have SVG support now. The other thing as well, if you see the text up the top, it's a little bit weird. For accessibility reasons, we had some hidden text. That text was no longer hidden in Sketch, so we had to hack our way around that. But generally, it worked. It worked pretty well. So the next obvious step for me was to try and build up some of these actual usable elements within Sketch. So the first stop was symbols. Again, symbols basically being the same as components. So I started rendering out our buttons in various formats. And I was able to get that into Sketch as a set of symbols. So on the right there, you can see the 3 different symbols. And these are reusable within Sketch. So you can create different instances of these and also change the text as well. Internally, the way we made this work and easy for developers is we made it so that inside of our button folder, for example, there would be a button.sketch.js, and it just exported an object of symbols like this, where each key was the name of the symbol that we wanted inside of Sketch, and the value was a React element to render to the screen. We took this same concept to our text styles, so our type hierarchy. We created an object of text styles where, again, the key is the name of the entry in the type hierarchy, and the value is a React element that we want to render to the screen. So we iterate over those, render them into the browser, capture them into Sketch, and it looks something like this within Sketch. So you can open this styled text menu. We've got all of the entries there, again, coming from the source of truth in code into the design tool. The other big thing, of course, is our color palette. There's a lot more than this, but basically all of our colors at Seek are defined in less, largely for historical reasons. We convert that into JavaScript. We iterate over that, render it to the page, which looks something like this. So we've got our full color palette available to be extracted into Sketch, which again, from the Sketch point of view, looks something like this. You've got your document colors laid out there for designers to use. And this is very much standard for a Sketch tool to have this. And again, all of this coming from the code as the source of truth. Now, in our case, our website is responsive, and our style guide, in turn, is also responsive. And so we came up with a system of defining the viewports that we wanted to render at, so we could consistently take a view across everything in our system at the sizes that we want. We made it configurable so it's easy to update. So there you can see we've got desktop and mobile plus as well for our symbols, with the right resolutions that we want to target. And you go over to Sketch, and this is what you see. For every entry in our type hierarchy, we had a desktop version and a mobile version. You went into all the symbols, and likewise, you had desktop, mobile plus available. And this was fully automated. So all the rules in code about how it should rearrange at the different screen sizes were all captured in our Sketch symbols here. All of that culminated in this one long page that you can see me scrolling through here. So just top to bottom, it's everything from our style guide that we want to export into Sketch. And we just snapshot every one of these things and automate the process of pulling that into Sketch. So this worked really well for us, and we're continuing to use this to this day. Now, it wasn't long after I got started, this was December 1st last year, that I said, it's happening. Just opened the PR that automatically converts our style guide components into a Sketch library with html-sketchapp. I couldn't have been much more excited about actually seeing this work in such a short period of time too. But it's really worth calling out that HTML-sketchapp was only one part of the puzzle of getting that to work. There was a lot of wiring required. If you look at the API that I talked about before, this isn't the entire API, but it's basically gives you a sense of it. It's pretty low level, right? You can create instances of classes. You can convert a DOM element to layers. But how do you actually turn that into a full end-to-end solution for getting content out of a browser and into Sketch? In our case, we had to create a lot of custom code inside of our style guide to perform this process. First, we had to compile an HTML-sketchapp script that included HTML-sketchapp and the code for extracting everything from the page. We compiled that with Webpack ahead of time. We had to start up a static web server that we could then reference during the process. We had to open Puppeteer, which is a headless version of Chrome, or Chromium, and we had to point it at the URL for that static web server that we just started up. We had to inject the script that we compiled in step 1. We then had to make use of that script, which we'd use to capture the symbols, resize the window for all the different viewports, repeat that process. Finally, we had to write the JSON to disk, shut down the static web server, shut down Puppeteer, and of course, if anything went wrong in any of these steps, we had to make sure everything got cleaned up correctly and so on. So there's a lot of plumbing for what is really kind of at a high level a simple task that we're trying to perform. Conceptually, it's really just one thing. And so I had an idea. Generally, whenever I see this discrepancy between the simplicity of the task you want to do, just at a high level, you know, if you were to explain to someone else what you're doing and it's just like one sentence, and yet the amount of work that you have to do is as long as we just saw, and including all the dependencies required for all of that, usually that's an opportunity for a tool, the creation of some kind of new tool. And so off the back of this, I started work on a project called HTML-sketchapp CLI, which is open source, and you can make use of this today. You can just npm install it and start using it. And it basically looks like this. All of that process that you saw before gets wrapped up into something as simple as this. You just say HTML-sketchapp. In this case, we're pointing it at an HTML file, and we're telling it which directory we want to export to. Being a JavaScript tool, of course, it's got its own config file if you want to do that. And that makes it a bit easier to define things like viewports. You've got your named viewports there of desktop and mobile. This is pretty much the config that we use at Seek. So the first bit of config there is saying that we actually want to start up a static web server from the dist directory in our docs folder. So that, again, that automates the process of starting up that static server, pointing at that URL, resizing the window at those viewports, and so on. Now, the one opinion that we kind of have to bake into the project for this to work so simply is that we have to know in your page, how do we actually find the things that you want to expose as symbols, as textiles, as colors. So we came up with a pretty straightforward convention of data sketch symbol attribute or text or color attributes, where the value is the name of the symbol or the textile, or in the case of color, since colors unfortunately aren't named in Sketch, it's just the value of the color. And that gives us the hook to select everything from the page that you want to export. But otherwise, anything that's in the browser that's nested inside of these is good to go. So we started using this internally on our style guide. And it was pretty exciting to see it actually being used for real. But the real sign of success for me was this, the fact that once we merged that PR, a lot of code got deleted. So obviously that's great for me personally on my own project to just get a heap of code out of there into a place where I can actually like work on it and test it and document it separately. But that means that for each one of you in this room, when you go back to work and you want to try this out, that's the difference, right, between where I was and where you are if you want to start doing this, right? So it's pretty cool. Where I get excited about it, though, of course, it's not just tooling for tooling's sake. It's what it means as part of a larger ecosystem within a community, within a company. And for us, it's all about building out this continuous design pipeline, bringing the world of continuous integration, continuous delivery to the world of design. So in our case, anytime a pull request gets merged into master, and like I said, this is happening literally as I'm preparing for this talk, once that PR gets merged into master, we deploy the documentation site again to GitHub Pages with a really cool CLI tool called GHPages. We automatically publish to NPM with an amazing tool called semantic release, which we could not live without. I could go on and on about semantic release. And finally, obviously, in the context of this talk, we generate these almost sketch files that are ready to be imported into Sketch. Now, from the designer's point of view, it's really, really cool. So we've got this Sketch library. So Sketch has a concept of libraries. You can open a Sketch file and say add as library, and it's now available in any Sketch file that you're working on your machine. So you can see here we've got this menu at the top that says Seek Style Guide Library. So that's always available. And you go down the list, and it's everything that we've exported from our living style guide. You drill down, so here we've got buttons, you've got all the different styles of buttons, and again, you drill down to that, and you've got the different sizes, desktop, mobile, mobile plus. And as I said, this is always kept up to date. So we encourage the designers in the company to point to a central version that we have on our shared drive. I don't like shared drives, but that's what designers use. And that stays up to date. So every time we update that file, all the designers get the latest version. And they're actually using it. Like, unlike the cactus example I showed earlier, designers are often coming up to me and asking me, hey, is that new component or the new symbol in the library yet? So it's pretty cool. Now, in practice, when you're designing an actual page, it looks something like this. Now, this is slightly sped up, but all up, this is about a minute's worth of work that you're seeing. And it's really not that much work. You know, it's pulling in symbols from the library, adjusting the overrides to customize the text. And you can see we've generated a sign-in form for Seek that looks pretty standard. And we can know for a fact that everything that we've used here is pretty much what you're going to get if you were to ask a developer to build it, because it's, again, pulling from those same primitives. Now, I could go on and on about that in isolation. I could end the talk there. But I think it's worth calling out that for me, this is really just the beginning of a much bigger shift in the way we think about design and design tooling and the way we interact across that boundary. There's tools like Compositor Lab, for example, that allow you to work on a style guide in a visual way. But the output isn't static files or mockups. The output is actual code that can run in your project. And code that's really meeting developers on their terms, you know, generating NPM packages, for example. Compositor is a suite of tools, so there's tools that allow you to build larger things out of those components and rearrange them in a visual way. It's really a rebirth of WYSIWYG editors in the era of components. I think it's actually due for a comeback now that we've got the abstraction a bit more correct. There's tools like Haiku, which is more of your kind of traditional animation tool on the surface. But again, the output is like NPM packages. It's not snippets for you to copy and paste. It's not static files. It's like live code. It's really designed to try and integrate into the way we all work for real. Tools like Module Studio, which is still in development. And again, it looks like your traditional, WYSIWYG editor. It's like we're back in the Dreamweaver days. You might think that's a bad thing, but the difference is that you're not just working with the lowest level primitives. You're working with primitives that you get to define. And that's where the concept actually starts to make more sense. It starts to make sense again. I didn't have time to update my slides. BuilderX, they're a sponsor of this event. They're in this space as well, so go talk to them. Who's from BuilderX? Anyone? No? No one's here? Okay. Talk to me about it. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people working in this space. UXPin, actually, talking about time, I put this in this morning because they tweeted this out this morning. UXPin are getting into the space as well. Why I'm really interested in UXPin is that they're seen as a more traditional design tool. Designers are using UXPin today, but they're promoting the fact that they're actually about to add major support for code being imported into the design tool, very much like what we're hacking into Sketch. They're making it a first-class part of the product. And that's where I think things are going to get really exciting. I'm keen to get off hacks and do it properly. Interplay is another one that I've actually been able to get my hands on. So you can see here I'm actually designing something for Seek. And again, it's pulling in those components that we've defined in our system, not low-level primitives that they define. And that's the key difference. So it's pretty amazing stuff. And so these are all, design tools that people are actively working on. Some are open source, some are paid. But I think we're definitely seeing a massive change in the way people think about the design process as a whole. To me, these tools are all about truly embracing the design systems era, trying to get the world of code and design to work together in a way that we haven't worked before, and really trying to improve the way we collaborate. It's about getting that feedback loop from design to code and back. That last point is the key thing that's been missing in the history of design in terms of how I've experienced it. Because often what will happen is designers will give you a nice design, you'll translate it to code, and then you'll iterate on that code and make it even better, but it won't make its way back into the next round of design. And that's starting to change. What's really interesting for us and something to think about is it means that it actually starts to change the nature of our role within our companies, because we're becoming custodians of design, not merely implementers. We actually have to understand the rules and translate them correctly into a set of components that can be then imported into these tools. And that actually changes the relationship between designers and developers. We've seen this play out internally at Seek, and I'm sure that this is playing out at companies all over the world. And these tools are going to make the need for that collaboration even greater. So the question I want to leave you with, a question that I'm still working through the details of, is what does this mean for the future of front-end development? What does this mean for what we do at work and how we collaborate with those around us? What does it mean for designers and their design tools? What does it mean from what we expect from our tooling? And what does it mean in terms of the quality of what we produce ultimately? That's the end goal. There's a lot of open questions and there's a lot of work to be done. But most of all, there's a culture shift coming and a mindset shift. And the best way to get ready for that is to start working today. So I encourage you, if you're interested in this space at all, get started today. Start sketching in the browser. Start hacking your way into traditional design tools. It'll get better, but now is the perfect time to start. And I hope if you're at all interested, you will join me on this pretty exciting journey. That's it for my talk for today, and thank you for listening.